Have you ever wondered what goes on inside a person's mind when they do something really bad? Imagine if someone who looks normal on the outside hides a secret darkness inside. This story is about that mystery. A story of a kind young woman and a man whose troubled mind led him to do something terrible. It is a story that makes us ask, what makes a person choose to hurt someone else? And can we ever truly understand the hidden thoughts that lead to such acts? In a small town in Iowa called Brooklyn, there lived a bright and caring young woman named Mollie Tibbetts. Mollie was only 20 years old, and she went to the University of Iowa. She was studying psychology because she was curious about how people think and feel. Mollie had a kind smile and a gentle heart, and she was known by many in her community for being friendly and full of life. Every day, she would wake up with hope and make plans for the future. She loved to run, and her jogs in the early evening were a part of her daily routine. Running made her feel free and connected to the world around her. One warm evening on July 18th, 2018, Mollie set out for a jog near her home. It was just like any other day. The sky was turning a soft shade of orange as the sun began to set, and the streets were quiet. Mollie put on her running shoes, stepped outside, and started her routine run. No one could have guessed that this ordinary moment would soon change everything. As she ran, little did she know that a dark fate was waiting for her. Her disappearance that night sent a shockwave through her family and the entire town. When Mollie did not return home, her family became very worried. The next day, when she did not show up for work at the Children's Day camp where she volunteered, the worry turned into deep fear. People began to wonder, where was Mollie? Who could have taken her away? Her boyfriend, who cared for her very much, was far away on a work trip. Even though he had seen her happy in a Snapchat message earlier that night, nothing could explain why she had vanished without a trace. The police were called in and soon began a search for Mollie. They looked at every detail of her last known movements. They spoke with her friends, her family, and even checked the data from her Fitbit, the small device she always wore while running. Every clue mattered. The police hoped that if they could piece together her steps, they might learn where she had gone or who might have been with her. In a quiet town where everyone knew each other, the idea that something so terrible could happen was hard to believe. Still, the investigation moved forward, driven by the need to understand what had happened and by the hope of finding Mollie safe and sound. As days passed, more and more tips came in from local people. Neighbors reported seeing things that did not fit the usual pattern of a peaceful evening run. The community was filled with questions and a growing sense of dread. Every time the police found a small clue, a footprint here, a piece of clothing there, the hope grew that they were getting closer to the truth. At the same time, the investigation was starting to look at every possible detail. Soon, they received a very important clue from a surveillance camera near the area where Mollie had run. The camera had caught a car following her, a Chevrolet Malibu. This small detail became a huge break in the case. The police worked hard to trace the car and, step by step, they discovered that the car belonged to a man named Cristhian Rivera. Rivera was 24 years old and lived in the same rural area as Mollie. At first, he might have seemed like just another person living a quiet life in a small town. But as the police dug deeper into his background, they began to see that something was very wrong. Rivera was originally from a place called El Guayabillo in Mexico, and he had come to the United States when he was only 17 years old. He did not have the proper papers to live in the United States legally, and he had been living quietly among the people of Iowa for several years. He even worked on local farms, and sometimes he used a different name on his paychecks. For a long time, no one suspected that he might be capable of such terrible actions. As the investigation continued, the evidence began to paint a dark picture. Rivera's car was seen on the surveillance footage following Mollie during her run, and later, when the police questioned him, he admitted to kidnapping her. His confession was a hard blow to the town. It seemed almost unbelievable that someone from their community could commit such a horrible act. Rivera told the police that he had taken Mollie and that he had led them to her body later on. On August 21st, 2018, in a lonely cornfield in Powesheik County, the police found a body. 2 days later, a medical examiner confirmed that the body was indeed Mollie Tibbetts. The autopsy report said that she had suffered many sharp injuries, and her death was ruled a homicide. This confirmation turned the search for Mollie into a tragedy that the town would never forget. At this point, the case was not just about a missing person. It had become a story about a loss that shook the entire community. People could not understand how someone could hurt Mollie so badly. They wondered what was happening inside Rivera's mind that made him do such a thing. This is where the ideas of criminal psychology come into play. Criminal psychology is the study of why people commit crimes. Experts in this field try to understand the thoughts, feelings, and events in a person's life that might lead them to hurt others. They ask questions like, what happened in Rivera's life that made him so troubled? Was there a part of him that grew up without love or guidance? Were there choices he made along the way that set him on this dark path? These questions are very hard to answer, but they are important. By trying to understand the mind of a criminal, people hope that someday such tragedies can be prevented. The trial of Cristhian Rivera started later, and it was a long, difficult process. The court had to decide if Rivera was guilty of the terrible crime of first-degree murder. Rivera's case brought up many issues that were talked about in the town and even in the whole country. One of the big issues was his immigration status. Since Rivera was in the United States illegally, many people began to say that if immigration laws were stricter, this tragedy might have been stopped. Politicians and leaders spoke about the case, and it soon became a topic in debates about how to keep communities safe. However, many people also pointed out that most undocumented immigrants do not commit crimes, and that it was unfair to use Mollie's death to push a political agenda. Mollie's own family was very sad and did not like the idea of her death being used as a political tool. They wanted her to be remembered for her kindness and her bright future, not as a reason for more harsh laws. During the trial, Rivera's own words and the evidence against him made it very clear to the jury that he was responsible for what happened. On May 28, 2021, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. This meant that the court agreed that Rivera had planned and carried out the murder of Mollie Tibbetts. A judge then sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of ever getting out. For many people in the community, this was a small measure of justice for the loss they had suffered. Yet, no amount of punishment could bring Mollie back or fill the empty space that her absence left in the hearts of those who loved her. In the days and weeks after the trial, the town of Brooklyn, Iowa, and the wider community felt a mix of sorrow, anger, and confusion. People held vigils and memorials to remember Mollie. Her story was told in quiet voices and in soft tears. At the same time, many people began to talk about what could be done to make sure that something like this never happened again. They discussed ideas about improving safety for people who run alone and about helping young people who might be struggling with difficult thoughts. They wanted to understand what happens in a person's mind that makes them do such harmful things. They asked, How can we help people before they hurt someone? These discussions about criminal psychology and the human mind were not easy, but they were important. When we look at the case of Mollie Tibbetts and Cristhian Rivera, we see two very different worlds colliding. On one side was Mollie, a bright young woman full of hope and dreams for the future. On the other side was Rivera, a man who had grown up with his own struggles and who made a choice that led him down a dark path. This clash of lives makes us think about the many things that shape who we become. Every person has a story that is made up of their past, their experiences, and the choices they make. Sometimes, things happen that change a person's life forever. In Rivera's case, it seems that many small pieces of his past came together in a way that led him to make one terrible decision. While we can never know all the details of what went on inside his mind, his actions show us that sometimes the darkness inside a person can be very strong. One of the hardest parts of this story is that it shows us how fragile life can be. Mollie was a young woman who had so much to live for. She had friends who cared for her, a family who loved her, and dreams that shone as brightly as the sun. Her life was a promise of good things to come, and yet that promise was broken on one tragic night. When a community loses someone like Mollie, it feels as if a part of the town is lost forever. Neighbors who once shared smiles and friendly hellos now walk with heavy hearts and cautious eyes. The warmth of the town is replaced by a shadow of loss, and the empty spaces where laughter once lived are filled with silence and sorrow. Even as the trial brought some answers, it did not heal all the wounds. The questions about why Rivera did what he did still linger. People wonder, was there a moment in his life when someone could have helped him? Could he have been saved from the dark thoughts that led him to commit this crime? Experts in criminal psychology say that understanding the mind of a criminal is very hard, but it is important. By studying cases like this one, researchers hope to learn how to spot the signs of a troubled mind before it is too late. They study how experiences in childhood, a lack of support, and feelings of isolation can build up inside a person. They ask if there could have been a way to reach Rivera before he made that terrible choice. These are big, hard questions, and there are no easy answers. But the hope is that by asking them, society can become a little wiser and a little more caring. In the months and years after Mollie's death, her memory lived on in many small, touching ways. Her younger brother, for example, and even the local football team chose to honor her by wearing her initials on their jerseys. Runners all over began to use the hashtag #MilesForMollie as they talked about the safety of women who run alone. Her friends and community started a group called the Mollie Movement, where people promised to be kind to one another, just as Mollie had always been kind. These acts of remembrance were gentle reminders that even though Mollie was gone, the light of her life could still shine through the actions of others. At the same time, there were many discussions on TV, in newspapers, and online about how Mollie's death should change the way people think about safety and immigration. Some people said that if immigration laws had been stricter, Rivera might never have been in the United States. Others argued that most people who come to America illegally are hardworking and do not commit crimes. These debates became very heated. Leaders like Vice President Mike Pence and President Donald Trump made statements that linked Mollie's death to the need for stronger border controls. But many in Mollie's community and family felt that her death should not be used to start political fights. Mollie's father, in particular, spoke out. He said that the Hispanic community in Iowa was full of good, hard-working people, and that Mollie's death should never be turned into a tool to spread hate. He wanted people to remember Mollie for who she was, a kind and loving young woman, rather than to focus on the political arguments that her death had sparked. The case of Mollie Tibbetts reminds us that behind every crime there is a story. It is a story of choices, of paths taken, and of the many forces that shape a person's life. While Rivera's actions were unforgivable, his story also makes us wonder how we can help people who are in pain or who are heading down a dangerous road. The study of criminal psychology is all about these questions. It asks us to look at the warning signs in people's lives, to try to understand what makes someone hurt others, and to see if there is a way to offer help before it is too late. By learning from these hard lessons, maybe we can build a future where fewer lives are shattered by violence and loss. Every time we think about this case, we are reminded of the importance of caring for one another. It is not just a story about a crime, but also about the community that came together in the face of unspeakable sorrow. Neighbors held hands in grief, and friends gathered to support each other. They shared stories about Mollie, about the way she laughed, the way she helped others, and the dreams she had for her future. In their hearts, Mollie became a symbol of hope and kindness, even as her life was taken away by a single act of cruelty. There is a long road to healing after a loss like this. For those in Brooklyn, Iowa, every day is a reminder of what happened on that fateful night. But as time goes on, they also begin to find ways to remember Mollie in positive ways. They organize community events, support groups, and safety programs to ensure that others are not left alone in their time of need. They work together to make their town a safer place, where the memory of Mollie can inspire change and kindness. This is how a tragedy can lead to hope, a lesson in how even the darkest moments can light the way to a better future. When we think about criminal psychology, we learn that many factors shape a person's actions. Some people grow up with love and care, while others face many hardships. Rivera's life was filled with challenges from the start. He moved to the United States without the proper papers and struggled to fit into a new and often harsh environment. Sometimes, when a person feels lost and alone, they might make choices that hurt others. This is not to excuse what Rivera did, but it is a reminder that behind every bad decision, there might be a story of pain, misunderstanding, or a failure of the systems that are supposed to help people. Learning about these things is not easy, but it is very important. It helps us see that we all have a part to play in making our communities stronger and more caring. Every detail in this case, from the quiet jog Mollie took that fateful evening to the long and hard investigation that followed, shows us the deep impact one person can have on many lives. Mollie's life, though short, touched many hearts. Her love for running, her kind smile, and her gentle nature made the world around her a little brighter. And even though her life was cut short, the way her memory is kept alive gives hope to many. It reminds us that every life is precious and that we must always look out for each other. The journey to find answers in this case was not simple. The police worked tirelessly, following every small clue, talking to hundreds of people, and using every tool they had to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The use of a simple device like a Fitbit helped show the path Mollie had taken on that evening. The clues, though small on their own, came together to reveal a tragic story that no one could have imagined. Each clue was a whisper in a mystery that grew louder until the truth was revealed. And when the truth finally came out, that Rivera was responsible, it felt like the weight of the mystery was lifted, even as the pain of loss remained. In the end, the trial was a moment when the community could see that justice was being done. Rivera's confession and the overwhelming evidence showed that he had made choices that led to a terrible end. The courtroom, filled with people who wanted to see justice for Mollie, was a place where the truth was spoken clearly. When the jury found Rivera guilty of first-degree murder, it was a small step toward healing, even if nothing could ever bring Mollie back. The sentence, life in prison without the chance of parole, was meant to show that actions like his have heavy consequences. Even as Rivera now sits in a maximum security prison far away, the questions about what makes a person do such a thing still linger. Experts in criminal psychology continue to study cases like this one, hoping to understand how a troubled mind can lead to terrible choices. They ask, could there be a way to see the signs of a dark path before it is too late? How can communities come together to support people who feel isolated or lost? These questions are not easy to answer, but they are very important. By understanding the mix of pain, fear, and isolation that sometimes fills a troubled heart, we can learn ways to help one another and maybe even stop future tragedies. Mollie's story also teaches us about the strength of community. In a small town like Brooklyn, people know each other, and when something terrible happens, everyone feels it. The loss of Mollie brought neighbors together. People who had always said hello in passing began to share their grief openly and support one another. In meetings, in quiet church gatherings, and in community centers, her name was spoken with love and sadness. They talked about her dreams, her hopes, and the beauty of the life she had lived, even though it was taken too soon. This story, while filled with sadness, also carries a lesson of hope. It reminds us that even when bad things happen, the way we come together can help mend the broken pieces. Every discussion about safety, every meeting about how to help troubled youth, and every act of kindness in Mollie's memory is a small light that pushes back against the darkness. It is a sign that even when we face terrible loss, we are not powerless. We can learn, we can change, and we can work to build a better future where everyone is safe. Thinking about all of this might make you feel heavy-hearted. It is hard to understand why someone would choose a dark path. But sometimes, by studying these difficult stories, we learn important lessons. We learn that every person, no matter where they come from or what their past might be, deserves support, love, and care. We learn that the choices we make can have deep impacts on others. And we learn that understanding the human mind, both its light and its dark parts, is a challenge that we must face if we want to build a kinder, safer world. Imagine for a moment what it must have felt like for Mollie's family. Every day, they had to live with the loss of someone they loved so dearly. They had to remember her smile, her kind words, and the promise of a bright future that was taken away in one night. Yet even in their grief, they found ways to honor her memory. They spoke about her in warm, loving tones and set up tributes that made sure she would never be forgotten. It is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, the love we share can help us carry on. Now, think about Rivera. Although his actions have brought pain and loss, his life is also a lesson. His story forces us to ask hard questions. How can someone's life go so wrong that they end up hurting another? Was there a moment when he could have chosen a different path? These are questions that people in the field of criminal psychology study carefully. They try to look at the many pieces of a person's past, the hardships, the mistakes, and the moments of failure, and see how they all add up. The hope is that by understanding these pieces, we can find ways to help people before they reach a point of no return. This case shows us that every person has a hidden story, and sometimes that story has chapters filled with pain and anger. But it also reminds us that many people overcome their struggles with help, love, and understanding. Rivera did not get the help he needed, and that is a very sad part of this story. In learning about his life, experts hope to find ways to better support those who feel lost, to give them a chance to change before it is too late. The questions that arise from this case are not only for police or psychologists, they are for all of us. They are questions about how we treat each other, how we support those who are hurting, and how we can create communities where every person feels valued and safe. Mollie's story is a call to action, a reminder that we must all work together to look out for one another. It tells us that even when we are faced with the darkest parts of human nature, there is still hope in the kindness and courage of many. Every time we hear about a crime like this, it is natural to feel scared and confused. We ask ourselves, why would someone do such a terrible thing? And while the answers are never simple, each case teaches us something new about the human heart. Mollie's life and her tragic death show us that sometimes the very people we trust can hide secrets that lead to unspeakable acts. But they also show us the strength of the bonds between people, the way communities can unite in grief, support, and a shared desire to make things better. As you listen to this story, let it be a reminder to always care for those around you. Look out for friends who seem lonely or sad. Reach out if you think someone might be in trouble. And remember, understanding the human mind, with all its light and darkness, is a long and hard journey. But it is a journey worth taking if it can help us prevent future pain and loss. This story is not just about a crime. It is about the mystery of why people sometimes choose to hurt others. It is about the lessons we learn when tragedy touches our lives, and about the hope that can be found in the kindness of people who come together to support each other. Mollie Tibbetts was a young woman with dreams and a bright future, and though her life was cut short, the memory of her light continues to shine in the hearts of those who knew her. And as we try to understand the mind of a person like Rivera, we learn that every life is a complex mix of experiences, choices, and feelings. In the end, the case of Mollie Tibbetts and Cristhian Rivera teaches us many things. It teaches us that every person has a story, and that sometimes the hardest questions we face are about why bad things happen. It teaches us that the search for answers in criminal psychology is not about making excuses for terrible acts, but about finding ways to help people before they reach a breaking point. It shows us that while one life may be taken in a moment, the impact of that loss can echo in the hearts of many for a long time. Think about the quiet courage of the police officers who worked day and night to find clues. Think about the detectives who carefully followed every small piece of evidence until they uncovered the truth. Their work is a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are people who are brave enough to seek out the light of truth. Their determination and the determination of the community gave hope that even after a terrible loss, justice could be served and healing could begin. It is natural to feel fear when we think about the possibility of such darkness in the world. But it is also important to remember that every story, no matter how tragic, can teach us something valuable. Mollie's story teaches us that life is precious, that every moment counts, and that we must always be kind to one another. It teaches us that understanding and compassion can help bridge the gap between darkness and light, even when the world seems overwhelming. In the quiet moments when you think about this case, remember that each person you meet has a hidden story. Some stories are filled with happiness and hope, while others may have chapters of pain. By learning to listen, by showing kindness, and by being ready to help. We all play a part in making our world a little safer. This is the heart of what criminal psychology tries to do. It seeks to understand the hidden struggles in every mind, so that one day, fewer lives are lost and more hearts are healed. The long and winding journey from that warm evening on July 18th, 2018, to the dark discovery in a lonely cornfield is a journey filled with pain, confusion, and many hard questions. Yet it is also a journey that shows us the strength of a community, the power of truth, and the hope that can come from understanding the human mind. Mollie Tibbetts' life, though short, was a beacon of promise, and her memory continues to light the way for others. It is a story that urges us to be better, to care more deeply, and to work together so that the darkness that once took her away might never come again. As you read this story, let it sink in that even in the face of great sorrow, there is always the possibility of hope. The work of understanding why people do bad things is hard, but it is a path that leads us to learn how to help each other. By taking care of our friends, by listening to those who need support, and by reaching out with kindness, we can all contribute to a future where fewer lives are lost to darkness and more are filled with light. In the end, this is a story of questions that still linger. What drives a person to make choices that hurt others? Can a troubled mind be saved before it is too late? And how do we, as a community, learn from such tragedies to build a better, kinder world? These questions may never have simple answers, but every discussion, every effort to understand, is a step toward a brighter future. Let Mollie's memory remind us that every heartbeat matters. Let it inspire us to be aware, to be kind, and to work together so that the pain of one can lead to hope for many. The journey of understanding criminal behavior is long and full of challenges, but it is a journey that holds the promise of preventing future sorrow. And as we remember Mollie, let us also remember that our actions, small acts of kindness, a listening ear, a helping hand, can be the light that guides someone out of darkness. This story is not just a recounting of a terrible event. It is a lesson in the value of life and the importance of understanding one another. It reminds us that the human mind is complex and that behind every action there is a story waiting to be understood. And while Rivera's choices have brought pain and loss, they also serve as a warning and a call to action. A reminder that we must all be vigilant, compassionate, and ready to help those who are struggling. So, as you go about your day, take a moment to think about the people around you. Look for signs that someone might be hurting, and do not be afraid to offer a kind word or a gentle smile. In doing so, you become part of the solution, a small light in a world that sometimes seems too dark. Mollie Tibbetts' story is a hard one to hear, but it is also a call to be better, to be the friend, the neighbor, and the helper that someone might need. In this simple tale of hope, loss, and the search for understanding, we see that every life is a puzzle of emotions, dreams, and sometimes deep pain. And while we may never fully understand all the choices that lead to tragedy, we can always choose to spread kindness and care. That is the true lesson in every story, no matter how sorrowful. The power of compassion can outshine the darkness, and even the smallest act of goodness can change a life. Let this story be a reminder that while some minds may fall into shadows, the strength of our community, our love, and our willingness to understand can bring us back into the light. And in that light, we honor the memory of those we have lost and build a future where every person is valued, every life is protected, and every heart is cared for. May we always remember Mollie Tibbetts, not just as a victim of a terrible crime, but as a bright soul who reminded us of the beauty of life. And may her memory drive us to seek understanding, to ask the hard questions about what makes a person choose darkness, and to work tirelessly so that no other community has to face such a deep sorrow again. In the quiet moments of our lives, let us carry forward her legacy of kindness and hope, and let us stand together in the face of life's many challenges. This long journey, from a peaceful jog to a tragic end, from the hidden thoughts of a troubled mind to the united efforts of a community seeking answers, teaches us that every detail matters. Each small act, each kind word, each effort to understand the pain in someone's heart can make a difference. And while the mystery of why Rivera did what he did may never be completely solved, the lessons we learn from this case can help guide us toward a world filled with more care, more love, and more hope. In the end, we are all part of one big community, connected by our hopes, our dreams, and our shared struggles. And even when darkness seems to overtake us, the light of understanding and compassion can lead us to a brighter tomorrow. This is the story of Mollie Tibbetts and Cristhian Rivera, a story that, while filled with deep sorrow and many hard questions, also reminds us of the strength we have when we stand together. It is a call to look into the depths of the human mind and to seek out the goodness that can guide us even in our toughest times. Let this tale be a guide, a gentle reminder, and a spark of hope that no matter how complicated and dark the world may seem at times, the simple acts of kindness and the effort to understand each other can light the way to a better, safer future for us all.